International News Review.
And now our very own celebrity international news review guy, Steve Okun's with us today. Good morning, Steve.
You know, happy to be with you on 4th of July weekend, Glenn. And Neil, glad somebody from the losing side could join us as well.
Oh, you see, early starts, he gets them in early. Mr. Okun, what about your musical prowess? We're putting the band together. We've got Glenn over there on trumpet. We've got Dan the man on the strings, me doing the tambourine. If you're going to join our boy band, what are you going to play for us?
Oh, I'm your drummer. No question, Neil.
Oh, there you go. He's got a drummer. Yes, very good indeed. So we've got our boy band together.
Oh, excellent. Hey, we got a lot to talk about today. And Steve, let's get started right away. The Chinese Communist Party 100th anniversary this past week. Lots of celebrations. It was a big moment for Xi Jinping and the country, was it not?
No, it was. And although what was striking was, a month ago, President Xi said that China needed to to be modest and humble. It needed to have an image of being a credible, lovable country. And, what did he say on the 100th anniversary? He said, the Chinese people will never allow foreign forces to bully, oppress, or enslave us. And those that do, we will crack their heads and spill blood on the Great Wall of Steel built from the flesh and blood of the 1.4 billion Chinese people. So a little bit of a different tack.
I'm not quite sure where he stands exactly. I wish he would clarify.
He was sitting on the fence a little bit, wasn't it? There wasn't much flowery prose at all, was there?
All right. So as we look at that, I mean, it's you had mentioned, hey, let's do a quick comparison. CCP at 100 versus USA at 235. They both have their challenges. Let's be honest, right? They both have their problems, racial and otherwise. They both have successes when it comes to economy. There is an interesting comparison to be made there, isn't it?
So there is, and it's an interesting period of U.S.-China relations, and I think a lot of this has to do with Joe Biden's approach to foreign policy. As Joe Biden said during the campaign, Donald Trump was tough on China, but Joe Biden would be tough but effective. And what you're seeing now is a coalition of countries coming together to confront China where it needs to be confronted, such as on human rights, such as on Taiwan, such as on technology and the race for the key sectors in the 21st century. And the Chinese do not like that. They do not like being bullied. They do not like being ganged up upon. I mean, who does? And so you're seeing a much different rhetoric in just the period between the U.S. and China. The U.S. has so many challenges and struggles, but it seems to be united on very few things. One of those things is on the need to have a different approach to China. Both Democrats and Republicans agree with that.
But where do you see it going, Steve? I mean, Joe Biden's going for a more collegiate, bipartisan approach, as you mentioned there. He's very much keen to mend fences. But then on the other side, Xi Jinping, he will not allow, his words, sanctimonious preaching from the likes of Joe Biden and elsewhere. Where do we go moving forward from this? Do you see China eventually coming back into the fold, or will they become more isolated as this goes on?
Well, of course, he's not the first to accuse the U.S. of being a sanctimonious preacher, and he won't be the last. So that values-driven aspect of foreign policy is going to continue for the U.S., even though it has so many challenges at home to deal with. But the challenges that Xi faces are grave in terms of the party. I mean, you look at what it's accomplished in 100 years, and it has been an amazing accomplishment. But the challenges it faces from having, growing old before it grows wealthy, all of the environmental challenges that the party faces, the struggle in having one party which permeates all of society, maintaining control without any checks and balances whatsoever, no checks from the judiciary, no checks from the press, no checks from a second party. So I think it's less what the U.S. is going to do and how China is going to handle these challenges is what's going to set the framework for the next decade, let alone next 100 years.
And Steve, playing off what you just said and what Neil just asked about the kind of modernization and bringing China back into the well, not back into, but into the international community in a broader way. Mike Ong is on Facebook Live, and he said he watched part of the CCP celebrations, and he noticed that the fly past had the number 171 not in Chinese characters, done in English. So that's kind of interesting as well, right? For, traditionally we would have seen everything be in Chinese characters.
Well, I mean, China's a global power now, and China has to speak. It speaks to the entire world. So you've got internal messaging and external messaging, and a party lasting 100 years is significant. The 71 is really a challenge, because look at what happened in the Soviet Union. That party lasted, that single party communist party rule lasted 74 years. Clearly, this party is going to go beyond that, but that is going to be a significant milestone. And the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party, took a lot of lessons from the dissolution of the Soviet Communist Party, and is trying to address those. That is why that number 71 is very significant for both the country of modern China, new China, and for the party.
You mentioned the domestic pressures there, Steve, but I am fascinated by the international pressures. If you just look at where we are now, you've got major powers complaining or disputing China's claims, as we know, in the South China Sea. Its relations with countries like the US, which you've mentioned, but also Canada and Australia, smaller powers, but not insignificant, are at their lowest point in years, if not decades. They're locked in bitter trade disputes. Where do you see China going forward internationally?
Well, I mean, that China has what it calls its dual circulation, policy. So you're going to trade with the external world, where you have to trade with them, but then you try and be as self-sufficient as possible when it comes to things like the microchips, and when it comes to medicines, and when it comes to energy and agriculture. That is a very difficult thing to pull off, where you can deal with the outside world on your terms when you want to, but then you'll be self-sufficient when you want to do that as well. I don't know how China's going to succeed at that, and the U.S. is going to go through that debate as well. The U.S. is saying, well, we need to reshore all of these supply chains. What COVID has taught us and what China has taught us is that we can't have medicines that are produced outside. We can't have semiconductors that are produced outside. But that's the way the world works today, and how you find that balance is going to be, I think the U.S. and Japan and Australia, Canada are going to find a much greater balance there than China is going to.
All right, Steve, let's move forward. Our next story, the former U.S. President Donald Trump's company and its finance chief have been charged with tax-related crimes. Prosecutors say the 15-year-long scheme helped executive evade taxes. They have pleaded not guilty. This guy, Mr. Weisselberg, Alan Weisselberg, has pleaded not guilty to tax fraud. But another part of these investigations into Donald Trump's organization in his past.
Yeah, well, Donald Trump described this as being a very terrible thing for our country, and that people are very angry about it. I don't know that there's a lot of anger about this tax fraud that's gone on for more than a decade. And so, look, this is a classic prosecution tactic. When you see a criminal organization, you start at the bottom and you work your way up, or you start lower and you work your way up the ladder of the organization. And here you go after the accountant. Glenn is a Chicagoan, right? Al Capone did not go to jail for murder. He went to jail for tax fraud. And that is what they're going after the Trump organization on as a start. What happened here is that for years, the Trump organization would give this employee in particular, their accountant, Weisselberger, $1.5 million tax free. Oh, live in an apartment for free, and we're not going to charge you any rent. Oh, we're going to pay your grandson's school fees. Oh, we're going to give you cars that you don't need just to take to and from work. So you accumulate all of this, you have to pay taxes on it. It's a fringe benefit that's taxable, and they haven't. So they're starting there with the accountant, and it's going to work its way up. The other thing is that, look, the Trump organization runs on debt. They've got hundreds of millions of dollars in debt coming due. If they are subject to all of these criminal complaints, they're going to have a tough time, refinancing. They're going to have a tough time getting new loans. So this is a real significant, overhang for anyone who works there, including the former president, as well as the organization itself.
Steve, we know the stranglehold that Trump currently has over the Republican base. I mean, is that impregnable? I mean, he's doing his usual thing. It's a witch hunt. He's gone along that line with all these political enemies. But as the charges mount, how long can he pander to his base? I mean, or is his relationship with his base just untouchable, impregnable, no matter what?
Untouchable, right? It's impregnable. I mean, he is going to keep
again. You see, we've got the LNS Chicago thing going. Yeah,
30% of voters in the United States are going to stick with him, no matter what. You don't win the presidency though on 30%. You could win the Republican nomination on 30%, and so that's the question that's going to play out. How much is this going to impact his ability to continue to run for office if he's under such threat? And if they start to go after the other officers of the Trump organization, who not coincidentally all have the same last name, Trump. So do you start going after the kids, right? Who've run this company for the last 4 years, who've overseen this tax fraud, go on and on. But he's going to hold on to his base. The question is that base strong enough to get the Republican nomination? It's not strong enough to win. And that is what the Republicans, I think, are really worried about. He loses, right, most likely, as he did last time if he runs again.
Well, that untouchable connection with his base leads to an article in The Guardian that calls it the dangerous turf for America. Giving his grip on the Republican Party and his base, you are pitting a former president against the justice system, and it could be very, very worrying for America's system of governance. Do you see it as seriously as that?
I mean, it could get there. I mean, the closest we came to this was, Richard Nixon, who certainly would have been indicted. No president's ever been indicted. Nixon would have been indicted, but he resigned, and then Gerald Ford pardoned him. I mean, could you see Joe Biden pardoning Donald Trump if he were to get indicted, to say we've got to get past this? And who knows, right? I mean, so there's just so much that has to happen before you can spin this out. But I mean, the real threat to the United States is that there is no truth anymore. I mean, 40% of the country believes Donald Trump had the election stolen from him. That does not work for a system of democracy.
All right, Steve, we got to move on. A new report has just come out by the U.S. State Department. They said Malaysia's predominant human trafficking crime is forced labor, and they're downgrading Malaysia to its worst tier in its annual human trafficking report. This is a big moment, because this report and this tier tracking has other implications, doesn't it?
Well, yeah. First, like in Malaysia, you look who you're now, in company with. It's Afghanistan, it's Burma, it's North Korea, it's Syria, it's South Sudan. You do not want to be characterized with these 17 other countries as being the worst offenders in the world when it comes to human trafficking. And this has a huge implication for the government, because it could put aid in trade with the United States at risk. But it also has a huge implication because businesses are not going to want to take the risk of doing business or investing in Malaysian companies when you see the forced labor that exists on their key industries, right? I mean, this is palm oil. It's other agricultural plantations. It's in electronics, and it's in, the rubber products industry. So this is a serious concern for Malaysia. Not just because the United States says it, but because businesses are not going to want to take the risk of having forced labor in their investment portfolio or in their supply chain.
Yeah, we tend to take a bit of a detached view with this. We talk about the economic side of it and the political side of it. To be very brutally frank, I'm much more interested in the human side of it. These are human beings we're talking about. We're talking about sex trafficking in some cases, being forced to work in massage parlors and bars and restaurants, often against their will. And it's also happening in Thailand. The report mentions Thailand and Malaysia. And I come back to the point, Steve, about our regular conversations about Myanmar. What role, if any, can ASEAN do here? I mean, this is not a new thing. I've been covering this myself for many years. There's been documentaries made about it. Let's not kid ourselves. This is not a new thing. Forced trafficking, forced labor, and so on. Should the region stand up? Is there anything that can be done?
Well, I mean, I think that's what you can't count on the region to stand up, because it hasn't done so yet when it comes, certainly when it comes to ASEAN taking any action on Myanmar. And so that's why you have to see businesses stand up. You have to see consumers stand up. You have to see investors stand up. And Neil, when it comes to human rights, you don't have these phase-in periods, right? You can't say, like on the environment, oh, we're going to have a 10-year phase-in to net zero. Or you have China, where China says, oh, we're going to achieve net zero in 2060. Well, I mean, that's just ridiculous. The planet's not going to be around if China doesn't get down to net zero well before 2060. But you accept these phase-ins on the environment. You can't say, oh, over the next 5 years, we're going to stop human trafficking. Oh, over the next 5 years, we're going to improve when it comes to human rights. No, you got to do that now. And I think you're seeing the financial investors, the business community, consumers not waiting for governments. They're not going to say, oh, okay, ASEAN, you handle it. No, we're going to have to handle it. And that is what's growing and growing. And where we see the climate crisis and action taking place, you're going to see it on human rights. It's going to be sooner rather than later.
Well, the sad truth is that a lot of people are making a lot of money off of human trafficking.
They wouldn't be doing it otherwise.
and that is what will be the driver. And there have been many reports that people involved in governments across the region are also behind or supportive of this. And so, it's a real challenge because it's so ingrained in many societies. Okay, we got to leave that one there, because we got to go on to our final story, which is a good news story, and that is a guy called Shawn Tan. Now, if you don't know Shawn Tan here in Singapore, he used to go by the name Xis, and he is now a professional wrestler going for the WWE, World Wrestling Entertainment, in the U.S. He's made it to the big show, Steve.
And speaking of WWE, I got Mason to give me his WWE Championship belt. And it's a little small. What we have the John Cena T-shirt.
There we go.
Right?
Yeah.
We got when we saw the WWE in KL, probably like 5
Don't
or
wear that
10
in China. Don't wear that in China.
Well, you can wear it in Taiwan though, right?
Very popular.
The WWE, it's just, for its core audience, is fantastic at what it does, and it's great to see it, being, it's always been global. You see, wrestlers, like Sheamus, right, from Ireland, and you've always seen wrestlers from Mexico, and the bad guys were always from Russia or Iran. When I was, growing up, watching the old school WWF, as it was called back then. So to see a Singaporean come in and be part of the WWE family is, I think, just going to be so much fun for kids who watch it in Singapore, and adults too, saying, hey, this, we're part of this.
I think it's a wonderful story. As we sit here, Steve, Dan the man is off camera pumping weights. He's lifting dumbbells. There's hope. There's a pathway. It's all about pathways.
It's funny, because I think it was maybe 2 years ago, maybe 2018, I went to a Singapore pro wrestling event.
For the audition?
for the leotard. Yeah. But it was good fun. It was actually held very close to here in Topayo. There's a Buddhist association nearby, and they have a big hall, and they rented it out. And so there was a ring in the center and folding chairs around the edge. And it was a Friday night of just hilarious good fun.
Yeah,
brilliant.
And they were all Singaporean wrestlers doing their thing. And it was great fun. That was the Singapore Pro Wrestling. And now Shawn Tan is up in the big leagues.
Well, and as I hold up the belt, the E in WWE is for entertainment. Right. It's not a sport. It's not something you're going to be, gambling on, and, but it's entertainment, and they do a great job with it. And so when you sent that story across, Glenn, I was like, oh, Mason, go get me your championship belt.
Brilliant.
Well, and now Shawn Tan, along with 2 Chinese recruits, are at the WWE Performance Center in Orlando, Florida. going through their paces. So if any of our listeners or viewers on the show know Shawn Tan, please contact us because we want to get him on the show.
Absolutely.
I want to do an interview with him. All right, Steve, thanks so much for your time today. Got to run.
See you later.